What's up, party people? This is Jelly Skeleton coming at you with another video, and this one's going to cover a range of topics using the Diablo games as an example, and it's just going to talk about several things that I find to be problematic, and this will include the reason I believe that Diablo 4 is the way it is, and if you watch my review, you'll know how I feel about that. So without further ado, I would like to talk about playing the game versus playing the end game. And I've never been one much to see what other players are doing in games. I've always figured out my own way, and you can see my build and how I'm able to cruise, the difficulty levels I'm able to cruise. There is some merit to this.
I must have a corpse.
I decided to do a little bit of research to determine a few things. One, what torment I should really be grinding on in order to get the best loot, and all these various other things, and I hear people talking about all this different stuff that I just want to give my opinion on, because, in all honesty, I find it to be pretty stupid. So, the Diablo games have regressed from being fun RPG experiences where you go through an interesting set of levels with an interesting character with cool classes and fun abilities, getting through the game, getting through the story, playing through all the various unique and interesting environments and dungeons. Very important, stressing these dungeons and their importance, to challenge yourself. You see how far you can get into the game on how high of a difficulty, etc. That was what the first game was all about. You know, how far can you get into it? With the expansion, they added higher difficulties, which were later kept into the series after that. And in Diablo 2, it's literally just, there's only 3 difficulties, and it's how far can you get? Right? You're challenging yourself. How far can you get? And there is no in-game, so to speak of, other than very basic things and grinding bail runs and stuff like that. So, you know, if someone's inclined to do that and they get that joy out of maxing their character out, that's all well and good. That's awesome. Good for them. I'm happy they get that feeling of satisfaction. But realistically speaking, the meat of the game is playing through it on these difficulties and challenging yourself. Well, in Diablo 3, as you can see, you can do that. I am clearly doing that. I'm playing through the game on the hardest difficulties, or at least close to, that I'm able to manage. I'm getting a good amount of challenge at it. And having a lot of fun. And that is one way you can play the game. The game lets you choose to play that way. But a lot of people have this mentality that the real game doesn't even start until Torment 13, or this level, or this Paragon level, or whatever. And a mentality like that is honestly, in my opinion, incredibly stupid. And the reason is because you're playing the game just so that you can immediately get to the end game. People got these strategies to level up in like 2 hours, usually for the season mode, which is a whole nother thing. But people are basically getting through the game, not even playing really through the story, just leveling to max as quick as possible just for the sake of being able to go and then grind end-game dungeons for clout or whatever they get out of it. It's the same kind of thing with people who play hardcore, looking down on people who don't play hardcore, and it's just this, again, it comes down to the casual versus the addicted, right? And the difference between what they're looking for in a game. And there are plenty of people who have played these games in a more casual manner, who enjoy actually playing through what the majority of the game has to offer, who don't want to speed to the very end just so they can grind in-game content, alright? Not everyone has that MMO player mentality. Not everyone gets that out of that. Maybe some people just want to enjoy a nice RPG where you level up, go through unique and interesting areas, and play with fun and interesting spells, skills, and mechanics, right? Like, that's all that an RPG really needs in order to be good. And Diablo 1, 2, and 3 all have that in their own ways. And as you can see, Diablo 3 here giving me a decent amount of challenge. I'm having to stay mobile. If these enemies can easily kill me, these pools, or in the environment there, you see the blood pools, those will instantly kill me because of the difficulty that I'm playing on. So, like, I'm getting a good amount of challenge here. Like, in fact, I say you can push the amount of challenge you can get out of Diablo 3 at any level more than in most of the games. And unlike in Diablo 4, which you're stuck on that easy difficulty until you get to Nightmare, which then again isn't hard, with the exception of elites that are just impossible, right? Now, these elites are really, really tough here. And it's taken me a long, long time to take the health down on these guys. But the point being is I'm able to do it. The game is giving me a challenging experience here, but it's not just saying, no, you can't do it, go back and grind. And that's the problem with Diablo 4, right? Where Diablo 3 offers both experiences if you want them. You have your more single-player oriented, get to the highest difficulty I can, you know, to challenge myself mentality. And then you have the I just want to grind for items mentality, right? And most people, when you see gameplay footage of people talking about these builds, like, they're not showing off, like, actual gameplay like I am, essentially, where you're fighting the monsters normally and progressing through the dungeons normally. Instead, they're just literally running to the end of the dungeon so they can farm. So you've turned essentially an experience that's this awesome overarching game into a job where you just farm. And if that's what you like, that's fine. But again, Diablo 3 lets you do that, but it also lets you have that classic RPG experience and challenge yourself while you're doing it. What does Diablo 4 have? Just the in-game grinding. Everything's all about that in-game grind. You can't really do it in a challenging manner. You can't feel like you're pushing yourself past your gear's limits. It's just go grind, 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 play completely for the in-game. There even is no, and I wish I'd gone into this in my review, new game plus option. Right? You cannot continue playing through the game on higher difficulties to challenge yourself. You're just at in-game content, stuck at that permanently. And that's all you get. That is all you get. And honestly, that is not why I come to Diablo. I have never once maxed out a character in Diablo, because I'm not the kind of person who's going to dump thousands of hours into a game. I will dump in a couple hundred if it's fun and I enjoy it. And I feel like that's something that a healthy person would do. You know, something that someone who's getting a normal gameplay experience would do, as opposed to catering to addiction. And that is what the season modes in these games are for those players who are addicted. And that's all well and good. Again, if you have fun doing that, that's great. That's fine. But that's not what the game should be completely catering towards. The whole game shouldn't just be catering towards that audience. And not only catering towards that audience, but intentionally designed to be as addictive as possible. And let's not forget, this is Blizzard we're dealing with here. About 10 years ago, I read a study of how Blizzard actually hired scientists in order to determine what the perfect addiction gameplay loop was as it pertains to World of Warcraft. So they've been one of the forerunners when it comes to their more MMO type stuff of this type of thing. But at least in Diablo 3 you get the option to still get a more classic RPG experience, as opposed to being forced and shoehorned into just being able to play for the end game, where the meat of the game, the meat of your experience, is grinding. In Diablo 4, even with doing a good amount of side quests, I got through the game in about 3 days. And in this game, you could get through this main story really quick if you wanted to, but if you put it on this challenging difficulty where you're having to actually really try, it takes a while longer. There's a lot of meat to the story in this game when it comes to what story's about in Diablo, which is less the story itself and more about the environments, your A to B dungeon progression, you know, all this other stuff that gives you that, you know, adventure feeling, right? You feel like you're going on an adventure, as opposed to just playing for the end game and grinding. Okay, grinding is okay in an RPG. I'm not one of those people who's going to say that RPGs should not have grinding in them. But when the sole focus of the game is grinding, that's a problem. When the purpose isn't grinding so you can get better and beat that tough enemy or move to a higher difficulty, but instead is just a means to the end of itself. The whole point is just the grind. That is poorly designed. Like with level design, like with story writing, like with many things, there should be a purpose behind something. If its only purpose is for the sake of it, then I feel like a lot of it is lost unless you're one of those incredibly addictive players. And again, more power to you if that's what you like. But as a result of players like you and how vocal these players are, we are stuck now with Diablo 4 being in the state that it is, which probably means Diablo 5, if that ever comes out, and in the future, Diablo games are going to be catering more towards that purely addictive audience. And it seems like most people are perfectly fine with that, which comes around into this whole trend in modern gaming in general, where the games are just designed to keep you playing addictively. Doesn't matter if it's Diablo 4, doesn't matter if it's Call of Duty. All it is just grinding for the sake of it. They keep giving you stuff you have to do in order to meet a certain requirement, in order to do a certain thing, and if you don't do that, you can't play the game. You can't have fun, really. And if that's something you don't find fun, well, too fucking bad. That's how modern gaming is now. All the conveniences and things that modern gamers like. That's something one of the devs said in an interview for Diablo 4. And that sticks in my craw so massively. It really grinds my gears, so to speak. Because when you're talking about things like that, when devs are talking about things like that, they're not talking about less clunky UI or less filler bullshit, you know, like instead they're talking about systems that are put into place to cater to the modern gamer's addiction and that gameplay loop. It's honestly revolting and a whole nother separate reason why I hate Diablo 4. And yes, Diablo 3 does cater to these types of players, but it also caters to the type of player like me. Diablo 2 caters, again, to those type of players, but it also caters to the type of player like me, to where I can still get a fun and satisfying experience with interesting levels and everything like that. But in Diablo 4, you can't. It's just simply you grind the story through the overworld with basic crappy dungeons and play for the end game, for that grind. And that's all that people talk about when they talk about Diablo 4, is that grind. And a lot of the time, that's the case with 3 too. And 3 gets a lot of hate in departments it rightfully shouldn't. But that's a whole nother separate can of worms. The can of worms that I really want to drive home, though, is the ruination of the gaming industry for that old school gamer, the gamer who wants to play a game, that the fun and experience they get, the enjoyment comes from playing through the game. But now we live in a world where games are just designed to create addiction, where if the game is even fortunate enough to have a story mode, to have a single player mode, or anything along those lines, it's just simply a means to an end to get people addicted to that end game loop. And Diablo 4 is such a crushing, heart-wrenching example of this. As you hear the amazing music in this dungeon swell, my heart does too, and it sinks. Knowing that that's what has become of my beloved Diablo. I may not have been a person who put in thousands and thousands of hours, but I'm a person who loved these games. A person who looked forward to these games. They were one of the RPGs that I would always look to in terms of inspiration for myself as a game designer. And now they've been reduced to ashes of what they once were with Diablo 4 and the way it caters simply to the crowd that wants to play games to be addicted. This has been Jelly Skeleton. Sit and spin, my fine friends.
I cannot do that.